the larger focus on this edition of the Right Stand remains this terror outfit called Hamas, which slowly is encouraging other terrorist units also to try and rear their head. So is End Hamas the only option, and is there now more than concrete proof that the Hamas is equal to, if not far more diabolical than the ISIS?
את הזוועות שחמאס ביצע לא ראינו מאז זוועות דאעש. ילדים כפותים שהוצאו להורג עם שאר בני משפחותיהם.
Hamas committed atrocities that recall the worst ravages of ISIS, unleashing pure, unadulterated evil upon the world. There's no rationalizing it, no excusing it, period.
We ask that question with responsibility, ladies and gentlemen. Is dismantling Hamas the only option? Because just as the world was rallying together to combat the menace of the Daesh or the ISIS, Hamas has unleashed one of the biggest attacks in the world on Israel. And it's been 2 weeks since Hamas struck Israel. And the aftermath of that shocking terror strike is only unraveling. Though Hamas was always known as an Islamist militia movement and a proscribed terror group in multiple nations, it's become a household name like the ISIS or the Daesh or the Al-Qaeda post the strike on Israel. And soon Israel denounced Hamas as nothing lesser than ISIS. They said Hamas is equal to ISIS, and US President Joe Biden adding more to that note, saying that Hamas makes the ISIS look rational. Now, this brutal barbarism carried out by the Hamas cadre was a replica of Daesh style. India's intel is actually joining the dot. Intel source via Group Editor Security Affairs Manoj Kumar Gupta reveals that Hamas and ISIS have actually several similarities and ideological moorings, and they have comparable operating styles. The source reveals that the Hamas not only accepts the ideology of the Daesh, but also its brutal manner of killing. Intel source reveals that the ISIS also, like the ISIS, the Hamas also sees the Western world as its enemy. And there are certain aspects which are highly xenophobic, and they also want to totally eradicate the existence of certain religious entities and denominations from the surface of this earth. Let's try and decode the striking similarity between the Hamas and the ISIS. Attack styles. The Hamas use motorcycles and drones, just like, and it's very similar to what the Daesh fighters did the same in Iraq and Syria. Again, the style of execution, killing children, women, targeted, using them as shields, indiscriminate manner, signature of both the Hamas and the Daesh. In 2014, the Daesh annihilated Yazidis in the Sinjar area of northern Iraq in a similar fashion. The Daesh and the Hamas share the same radical Islamic ideology, both brutal towards human life, use the same extremely violent and barbaric actions to achieve their goals. They use innocents as terror shields. Both terror outfits are unalarmed and show no remorse at all. Every tragedy, they try to turn it around as an opportunity, and they like to wreak havoc among innocents. Exchange of cadres. In the recent years, after attacks on the Daesh in Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan and other nations, its cadre have taken shelter in Palestine, in Hamas-dominated areas. Similarly, Hamas leaders have met Daesh in Yemen and Syria on different occasions. On many Hamas-affiliated websites, it is suggested that members of the Islamic State in Sinai are also involved with the Izz al-Din al-Qassam brigades, which is the military wing of the Hamas. In fact, if you look at the geographical domination, Hamas is smaller in scale, but very similar to the Daesh. Its ideology, ideological moorings, very similar to the ISIS in the way of Salafia, Jihadiya. It is also important to note Hamas allowed Salafia organizations to operate in Gaza after 2007. This is what intelligence sources are telling CNN News 18 via our group editor, Security Affairs, Manoj Kumar Gupta. Hamas also wants to establish Islamic rule all over the world and wants to start by first dominating the Jews, wiping out the Christians. These are all similar doctrines. Like the Daesh calls to kill all non-Muslims, Khalid Mashal, one of Hamas's founders, on the 12th of October asked for the killing of Jews all over the world. Calling for jihad against Jews and Christians also demonstrates a clear connection between the Hamas and the Daesh. And that's what sets up the conversation for this evening on The Right Stand, this Friday edition, ladies and gentlemen. Hamas is equal to ISIS, and as other terror outfits get active, is dismantling this terror unit and its infrastructure the only option?
Hello, Moto.
Let's go across to Glenn Carle, former National Intelligence Officer of the CIA, Dr. Meir Javedanfar. He is a Middle East analyst, Reichman University. Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain, former GOC 15 Corps of the Indian Army with us, and also Avi Melamed, author and Middle East strategic intelligence analyst. Namaste, gentlemen. Thank you very, very much for your time this evening. And let me start with this question. Dr. Meir, would you agree with the analysis by the Indian intelligence why the Hamas and the ISIS are the same? Or is there more to this?
But I think generally, that until today, we were under the impression in Israel that Hamas was an organization that was not just a jihadi organization, but it was also an organization that had changed from its early years of simply being a jihadi anti-Israel organization to a more mature organization who took calculated risks, who carefully calculated the loss versus benefits of its actions, who wanted to stabilize the economic situation in Gaza, who wanted to rule Gaza, to continue ruling Gaza by allowing the economy to develop rather than picking unnecessary. Why it seems that, according to various reports, the Israeli intelligence assessment was lulled into believing that an attack by Hamas is unlikely, an attack of the sort that we saw on the 7th of October. This was the general outlines. But now many people in Israel now see increasingly Hamas as more or less like Daesh. It's jihadi, extremist. It's extremely. It doesn't take the risks. It doesn't take the consideration of its own. It doesn't take the welfare of its own population into consideration, and it carries out very, very viciously violent acts against civilians. So more and more, yes, Hamas is being viewed as a new Palestinian and more politically correct version of Daesh, especially among the leftist, populist leftists in Europe and the United States.
Mr. Avi Melamed, would you concur? Is it true that the Daesh cadre also found refuge or found place, a home in the Gaza Strip under the Hamas post-2006-2007?
Yes, there has been a lot of reports about cooperation between Daesh that is based in Sinai and Hamas in Gaza Strip. I want to add something else to the discussion. Accurately, as you said, Hamas and ISIS, Hamas is to a large extent ISIS. Though there are different ideological aspects and so on, in the end of the day, let me explain why Hamas and ISIS in the end of the day is the same entity, or it's the same thing. Because they have two major things in common. One is the genocidal agenda. We have to emphasize that. It has to be clear. Hamas and ISIS have a genocidal agenda. You mentioned the stories of the Yazidis in the context of ISIS in Iraq, in Syria. It's the same with Hamas in the context of Israel and Jews in Israel. Here is something that is interesting to know. 2 years ago, in September 2021, Hamas held a conference in Gaza Strip. The conference was called in Arabic Wa'ad al-Akhirah, which means the promise of the end of days. This is a concept that is taken from Islam radical theology. And the conference dealt with the question, what to do with the state of Israel after it will be eliminated. The conference ended with a statement by Hamas, a call for actions or recommendation statement that has 20 articles. The articles explains exactly what is going to happen to the people of Israel. Let me quote Article 16 of this statement. Article 16 says that the Jews or the Israelis that will still be alive will be scientists and people that has any kind of value for Hamas. Now, you may wonder, like the viewers, what about the rest of the people?
Yeah.
We got an answer for that on Saturday, October 7th.
Yeah.
So this is one reason why Hamas is ISIS. The other reason why Hamas is ISIS, they both have an apocalyptic vision of mankind. They basically want to create a huge entity, global entity called Caliphate that should be governed according to the Islamic strict religious codex known by the name of Sharia law. The people that will live in this entity and will not be Muslims are doomed to live as slaves, female slaves, male slaves. They will have no human rights whatsoever. They will be inferior. So this is another common denominator between Hamas and Islamic Jihad. As my colleague Meir, Dr. Meir said very accurately, there was this kind of like PC presentation, politically correctness of Hamas trying to make cosmetics appearance, but we should have no mistakes about it. Hamas is similar to ISIS. It's ISIS twin.
But this then extends the thought continuum, General Ata Hasnain, and that brings us to the bigger question. Is going to demolishing the infrastructure, is it going to kill the ideology? If there is an ideological continuum that extends into multiple nations, and this is a fundamentalist ideology.
See,
the objective of the Israelis...
This is a huge challenge, there is no doubt. The question is for me?
Yes, General Ata Hasnain. Yes, please.
Okay. This is a huge challenge. And the day we learned on the 7th of October, when I learned about this massive attack which Hamas had carried out on southern Israel, I realized this was nothing but a borrowing from ISIS ideology, ISIS strategy. Little did I know that Hamas had actually become ISIS, virtually. Let me just go back slightly. I'm going to give me a minute to just go back. ISIS started essentially as a flow out from Iraq, the Al-Qaeda in Iraq. It is an Al-Qaeda plus. It was set up essentially as something which was a counter to Al-Qaeda, going beyond having territory under his control, having finances under his control, and looking at the establishment of the caliphate. When after 3 to 4 years of operations, it was dismantled to an extent, it went into hiding all over the world. And you found the manifestation in Philippines, in the area of Marawi. It happened in Sri Lanka, 18th of April 2019, if you remember. It happened in Afghanistan. Now it is happening here. And now it is quite confirmed that ISIS had spread out all over the world, remained in a networked state, and here slowly the process is starting. We expected in India that this process would start from somewhere in northern Afghanistan, which is the ungoverned area at the moment. The Taliban doesn't have control over it. And it is from there that the whole area of Khorasan would be addressed. But I think we were mistaken there slightly. The battle has gone back to West Asia. The battle has gone to Hamas, which is already an existent terrorist organization, only now morphed with the ISIS. And everything we are seeing in the last 10, 12 days is obviously a reflection of exactly what the ISIS strategies are all about. That is the use of genocidal tendencies virtually as a strategic weapon. And you will see Slowly after this, the ability to fight conventional. They did it in Mosul. It took almost 6 months to dismantle, to actually defeat them in Mosul.
Yeah.
And Mosul was all about terror. A terror battle converted into conventional operations. This is something that the Israeli army will have to be very careful about when they go into Gaza to conduct ground operations in the very near future.
Now, here is the threat with the Daesh that we saw, that a lot of the Daesh cadre which actually congregated into Syria or aggregated there, Carle, then they were advised to disperse, quietly go back to their own countries and to then push for the ISIS ideology and the Daesh ideology on their turf. And we had a lot of radicalized elements who came to India too. Only recently a huge ISIS-influenced module has been bussed closer home. In fact, they were timing attacks and serial attacks, targeting even the Chabad house in Mumbai, along with other religious establishments in Delhi, Aligarh, Mumbai and Pune. And this entire module was busted. They were going to use high tech, and this was all planned around this festival time. So there is a thought continuum. So is going to, just by eradicating or demolishing the infrastructure of the Gaza Strip, is it going to solve the problem? How are we going to deal with the ideological moorings from where these terror outfits emanate?
Well, each of the gentlemen who have spoken before has made good points, and it's clear, I agree with what each has said, concerning Hamas's evolution, at least tactically. I think we almost implicitly have given Hamas more credit than it's due, in the sense that it has always been genocidal with respect to Jews broadly, and certainly Jews in Israel and the region. I think it's an error, however, and this is one that the United States struggled with, and I think an error that the United States made for many years in the war on terror, to conflate and combine and view as essentially one ISIS or Al-Qaeda, or in this instance, Hamas. The tactics certainly have changed. The ideology of Islam, at least on the far right, has morphed over decades to become more vicious and more set on, frankly, genocide and forcing the world to become an extremely conservative version of Islam. However, the distinctions between Hamas and Hezbollah, or even Islamic Jihad and ISIS, are critical for a successful counterterrorism approach. The ideologies are morphing. Similarly, all of Islam has been affected in horrible ways for decades by this. But the distinctions remain real and significant from group to group. Hamas fundamentally wants to kill the Jews in Israel and destroy Israel. It philosophically would like to kill me because I'm a kufr living outside of Dar al-Islam. But if we view Hamas as ISIS, I think we will lose some nuance that we need to destroy and to counter ISIS effectively. It's an error that the United States made in its war on terror, to view all Islamic jihadists as basically the same thing. Ideologically, they communicate, they share similarities, they are moving in similar directions, but they are not the same.
But if they are different, but their patterns are the same, their doctrines echo each other, their actions mirror each other. So how do we then look at it? When you talk about the differences, it's ironical that Iran, which Israel is actually blaming to be behind or backing the Hamas, is largely Shia, whereas the Hamas are Salafi jihadis. That means they are Sunni. The Shias and the Sunnis also don't see eye to eye, and there is a lot of conflict that's happened between them, sectarian conflict. But in this case, they are actually the other way around. The Hezbollah are supposed to be Shia, but they have got grounds in Iraq, which is largely Sunni. So how do we then view this, Carle? And then we'll take it back to our Israeli guests, and then Syed Ata Hasnain. Yeah.
Sure. The common denominator, of course, for Hezbollah, Hamas, and then behind them Iran, is Israel and the Jews. And I think Iran is sincere in its anti-Semitism, and it's also cynical in its exploitation and in creation, development, support of Hezbollah and now Hamas. because it's a way for Iran to leverage and enhance its power in the region in its conflict with the Sunni, actually. So it's both sincere, it being Iran, sincere and cynical in its use of Hezbollah and Hamas with respect to Israel. Hamas is happy to take help from wherever it can get it, because it can only get it from Qatar and from Iran. And they being, in this instance, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, or ISIS, share many of the points that my colleagues here have pointed out, and they are important, and they are frightening, and we must we must somehow counter them. But the distinction to me remains fundamentally important. Hamas is out to kill the Jews of Israel and destroy Israel. And yes, ideally, Israel and everyone else should work to destroy Hamas. The challenge is how, and Israel, for all the capabilities that it has, and I've worked closely with my Mossad colleagues and the IDF, and they are outstanding. This has been a nut that no one's figured out how to crack yet, without causing so much more collateral harm to Israel's image and to others that much of the entire Muslim world becomes inflamed against all Western and non-Islamic entities.
Because the moment a humanitarian crisis is triggered, Dr. Meir, what happened with the ISIS or the Daesh is a lot of the Daesh cadre escaped with the refugees. And then they spread across other countries, and the Daesh terror started manifesting everywhere else. So how do you control that? Secondly, if the Hamas are supposed to be seen in isolation from the other terror outfits, despite having ideological moorings or executional mirrorings, how would you do it?
I don't think ever in isolation from, but distinct from.
Distinct from the others. Dr. Meir.
Hi, sorry. I teach Iranian politics in Israel. I'm originally from Iran, so please allow me to use some of my research and some of my focus into here. We have to look at Hamas as one member of what Ayatollah Khamenei has called the axis of resistance.
Okay.
These are mostly, apart from Hamas and Islamic Jihad, these are mostly Shia groups in the region who have got their own political party in their own host country. So in Iraq, they have their own political party. In Lebanon, they have a political party called Hezbollah. In Yemen, they have a political party, the Houthis. But more importantly, each one of them has its own militia. And in many cases, the militia of these proxy groups is more powerful than the armed forces of the host country. Okay. So this makes it almost impossible for the host country to rein in the power of the pro-Iranian militias. For example, it's almost impossible for the Lebanese army to take on Hezbollah. It could lose. The same for the Iraqi army versus the Hashd al-Sha'bi, which is the popular mobilization force for Iran's Iraqi proxies, and it goes down the line. Now, let's take the scenario that Hamas is dismantled politically in the region. Okay. Its armed forces, where are they going to go? Are they going to go to Egypt? Egypt is not going to allow them in. You see, this is one of the major differences between the U.S. occupation of Iraq and Israel's upcoming occupation of Gaza. When America went into Iraq, Iraq's borders with Syria were open. Iraq's borders with Iran were open. So the Iranian regime and the Syrian regime were pumping in jihadis and arms and money and explosives. Hamas will not have that luxury once Israel goes inside it. So first and foremost, its military infrastructure is likely to take a major hit. Politically, it won't die. It's probably going to exist in the West Bank. Right. But even if Hamas is politically collapses, let's say in Gaza, still the Ayatollah Khamenei's axis of resistance will exist without one member, without an important member, but it will exist. And we have to remember that Hamas was ran in accordance to how Ayatollah Khamenei manages the axis of resistance. It's almost impossible for some people say Iran did not know if Hamas was going to attack. Right. I'm sorry, that's almost comical. Iran is not going to give Hamas $200 million a year, $1 billion a year, and let them decide whenever they wish to attack Israel. when such an attack could undermine Iranian interests, could involve Iran directly, could involve Hezbollah. So this decision was taken by Iran and Hamas, in my opinion. It's a miscalculation for them. But even if Hamas goes, the axis of resistance will continue, minus a member.
Minus a member. So that's another perspective here. Avi Melamed. Avi Melamed, can you hear me? Your thoughts? Dismantling the Hamas infrastructure, military infrastructure, is that going to help? Will it contain the cadre, or will the cadre slip away and will it manifest elsewhere? You're on mute, Avi. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead, please.
I want to make it very simple and very clear. If we want to offer Israelis and Palestinians any hope, we must eliminate Hamas and Islamic Jihad military capabilities. Now, it doesn't mean that we have to hunt down every last person of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. It doesn't mean that we have to demolish the last rockets of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. What it means is that we have to eliminate Hamas and Islamic Jihad military capabilities to the point they will be not able anymore to continue and to dictate their will and the Iranian will on the Israelis, on the Palestinians, and on the region. Hamas views itself as a regional player. The end objective of eliminating Hamas, which is the first phase of change, the end objective of that is to make Hamas no longer relevant. Not a regional player, not even a domestic player. Now, as of ideology, we can't eliminate ideologies.
Correct.
Nazism exists up until our times. Other ideologies exist. You can't eliminate ideologies. This is not the point. The point is to address those radical factors who are inspired by these radical ideologies and eliminate the ability of those factors to continue and to play any relevant role. So the idea is very simple and it's very significant. If anyone wants Palestinians and Israelis to have a future of hope and prosperity and life, it starts with eliminating Hamas and Islamic Jihad military capabilities. From there, you can move to the next phase, starting to build different paths and different trajectory, a positive one.
But that's the final comment here on this conversation, and we hope to have more in the coming days in terms of building a strategy. Destroying the military capabilities, General Ata Hasnain, will not, as Dr. Meir said, destroy the axis of resistance or Iran's motivation. It will be minus one member. They will create that pawn. They'll recreate it. So it will come back. It's not going to end there. So it's got to be something far more punitive elsewhere.
I compliment Mr. Avi for his intervention just now. This is exactly what counter-terrorism is all about. If you want to put an end to active terrorism, you do not have to eliminate the last terrorist. What you have to eliminate is the networks. The networks which enable terrorism. For example, finance. If you can ensure that you dismantle the complete financial networks which support terror, you can do away with terror to a great extent. The supply chain of weapons, grenades, all kinds of missiles. There are 130,000 missiles in Gaza and with the Hezbollah at the moment. Where have they come from? And if a country like India can seal off Kashmir to a great extent, I see no reason why the IDF, with all its excellent professionalism, cannot seal off the coast of Gaza. Where is all this coming from? Now that's the physicality of it. But besides that, today's world is all networks. Ensure that no networks continue to exist there. There will be lots of drug networks, financial networks, media networks, all kinds. We've done this very effectively in Kashmir, and we are thriving on that today.
Very fair point made that you've got to destroy the networks. One of the key networks is the currency, cryptocurrency network through which the funding has happened into millions of dollars, if not billions. That's the estimate. Watch out for that story here on CNN News 18 in the coming days. We've got all the details on that too, and there is a comprehensive crackdown that's currently being attempted by US and Israel in conjunction with certain other entities. We're building on that story, and we're trying to get out all the details so that we can inform our viewers properly. So for the moment, winding up this conversation, thank you very much, gentlemen. Very engaging conversation. Thank you.